Ukraine called, Europe answered in a mind-blowing way. The Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, and the UK have just combined to do something mind-blowing for Ukraine. President Zelensky just got almost everything he asked for, and more, as Europe has delivered precisely what Ukraine needs to take the war to Russia. Now, the next step is simple. Ukraine, go fuck up Russia. That latest Ramstein meeting has been and gone, and Ukraine has come out a bigger winner than it has in almost all previous iterations. How much bigger? Well, Ukraine left the meeting with a new series of aid packages that total around $4 billion. This isn't a case of vague promises being made. That money is coming in the form of the precise types of weapons that Ukraine needs in its war against Russia, and no less than Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov has confirmed it. During a post-meeting briefing, Fedorov said that Ukraine's allies have seen that a window of opportunity is now available to them, and he laid out what some of the new aid will provide. Today, likely one of the largest ever aid packages under the Pearl program was announced, totaling $1 billion. A package for long-range artillery was also unveiled today, meaning long-range systems capable of reaching 30-plus kilometers, Fedorov declared. The key in that statement is likely one of the largest aid packages under the Pearl program. Pearl stands for Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, and it's a program set up by the United States that enables Ukraine's other partners to purchase US-made weapons that are then delivered directly to Ukraine. The middleman in terms of weapons arriving in one country to be held before delivery is cut out. Instead, Ukraine points to what it wants, and the aid is spent on those weapons, which head directly to Ukraine. Pearl has already overseen large aid donations. By the end of 2025, NATO members and partners had pledged more than $4 billion to Pearl, albeit over several months, and it was expected that much more money would flow into the program in 2026 and beyond. Now we're seeing that happen. An extra $1 billion into Pearl translates into a lot of Western weapons that Ukraine needs to build upon its own domestic drone and weapons production industries. But Pearl isn't the full story. Far from it. We mentioned 4 countries in the video's introduction. All 4 are stepping up with aid and other help that is designed to make Ukraine stronger than ever before. We'll start with Belgium. One of the biggest pieces of news to come out of the Ramstein format was that Belgium will finally transfer some of the F-16s that it promised to Ukraine years ago. 7 will soon land on Ukrainian territory, 3 of which are combat-ready and good to go, with the other 4 being aircraft that Ukraine can strip for parts to maintain the rest of its fleet of F-16s. That's a massive improvement over Belgium's previous promise to only transfer the 4 non-combat-ready F-16s, RBC Ukraine reports, and it's also a sign that Belgium is finally pushing past the delays that have forced it to hold back on deliveries in the past. Both Belgium and Norway have been holding back on delivering 36 F-16s pledged to Ukraine, with the reason on Belgium's part being that it's awaiting a delivery of F-35s from the US before it can go ahead. Norway's F-16s are in a Belgian facility awaiting repairs that have also stalled, RBC Ukraine reports. So the fact that Belgium has made this pledge is massive for Ukraine. It means the excuses and delays are finally being put to bed, and Ukraine's air force will finally be strengthened, with aircraft that many will argue should have been in the skies defending Ukraine and destroying Russia for years. Next up, the UK. Now, the UK can't be accused of delaying or holding back on its support for Ukraine. It has consistently been one of Ukraine's most ardent supporters, having already set up drone production cooperation agreements as well as pushing itself to spearhead the Coalition of the Willing that intends to provide security guarantees and likely boots on the ground in Ukraine once the war is over. So at Ramstein, the UK focused more on making things even worse for Russia and better for Ukraine by delivering even more. What does more mean? Hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones, all paid for using proceeds from Russia's assets held in the UK. RBC Ukraine reports that the UK pledged an £852 million package to Ukraine that will include funding for 150,000 Ukrainian-made drones, as well as 350 missiles for Ukraine's air defense systems. Sticking with air protection, the UK will also provide more modern radars for Ukraine's systems to help Ukraine spot incoming threats that it can destroy with its missiles and interceptor drones. What we see here is the reinforcement of what has developed into one of the strongest alliances in all of Europe. The UK has come through once more for Ukraine, even as it deals with its own turmoil amidst the resignation of former Defence Secretary John Healey as rows over military spending heat up in the UK, and the resignation of Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer. Ukraine will appreciate the help. It will also be thankful for the extra air defense support, especially as what the UK will deliver aligns perfectly with the pledges made by Germany during the Ramstein meeting. As part of its contributions, Germany has pledged $400 million to buy air defense ammunition for Ukraine, along with a further $200 million to buy PAC-3 interceptor missiles, both of which will arrive in Ukraine by way of the Pearl program, the Kyiv Post reports. This amounts to Germany using Pearl for the fourth time since it was created, and the fact that it will be buying Patriot missiles is massive for Ukraine. These are the types of missiles that Ukraine needs to deal with the Russian cruise and ballistic missiles, but they've been in short supply inside Ukraine in recent months. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius outlined the other German offerings, including those it's making outside of Pearl. Air defense remains at the center of our efforts. We have delivered another IRIS-T system to Ukraine. Recently, we have also accelerated the supply of guided IRIS-T SLS and SLM missiles. In addition, we will provide a 3-digit number of air-to-air missiles from our own stockpiles. There's a good reason why both the UK and Germany have focused on air defenses with their military aid. Ukraine sorely needs more missiles and modern systems. Zelensky himself reveals that he made that very well known to NATO Secretary Mark Rutte during his opening speech at the Ramstein format. Yesterday I raised two urgent issues with Mark. The first is the number of air defense systems, the second is artillery shells. Currently there is not enough of either, both are urgently needed, Zelensky declared. As he encouraged European heads of states to do even more, not just to protect Ukraine but to guarantee Europe's collective security against the Russian threat. And the numbers back Zelensky. According to Kharkiv's Gwara media, Russia launched 8,150 drones and 211 missiles at Ukraine in May, killing 274 civilians and injuring a further 1,763 in the process. That's the Russian strategy: commit war crimes to terrorize Ukraine's people into wanting to give up. However, as tragic as these figures are, the real news lies in the interception rates. Ukraine's air defenses managed to take out about 90% of the drones that Russia launched, with Ukraine's interceptor drones likely playing a massive part. That rate could always improve, but it isn't the priority for Ukraine right now. What is Ukraine's priority is the Russian missile threat. Of the 211 missiles that Russia launched in May, Ukraine was only able to stop 55%. The number drops drastically for ballistic missiles, of which Ukraine was only able to intercept 17% of what Russia fired. That's where more Patriot missiles and other modern air defenses come into play. Ukraine desperately needs both, and Germany and the UK have just pledged more of these defenses. For Ukraine, that should add up to a few more months where it's able to bump up its missile interception rate. The knock-on effect is obviously fewer civilian deaths, but also an uptick in morale and a reduced ability for Russia to damage the Ukrainian rear. Less damage in the rear means more offensive power delivered to the front. And speaking of offense, that's where the Netherlands comes into play. So far, most of what we've covered focuses on European nations giving Ukraine what it needs to defend itself against Russian attacks. Vital, yes, but there's that window of opportunity that Fedorov mentioned, as Ukraine is building momentum against Russia. For the Netherlands, the Ramstein meeting was an opportunity to boost Ukraine's attacking might, especially when it comes to dealing damage to Russia in the occupied territories and on Russia's own turf. What does that mean? We'll reveal all in a moment. First, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, then now is the perfect time to pause for a second, hit the button, and then get right back to the video. For the Netherlands, offense took priority. RBC Ukraine reports that the Netherlands, among other things, will provide Ukraine with 700 cruise missiles as part of its aid package. That brings us to the obvious question of just where these missiles are going to come from. After all, it's not like the Netherlands has a vast stockpile of cruise missiles that it can hand over to Ukraine while ensuring its own territory remains protected. It has some, sure. For instance, April 2025 saw the Netherlands announce that it was preparing to spend around $2 billion on 175 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Those won't be heading into Ukraine. The US would have to give the go-ahead for them, and it's also nowhere near enough to hit the 700 missile mark that RBC Ukraine reports. But this is where the genius of the Dutch donation comes into play. The Netherlands isn't going to provide Ukraine with 700 cruise missiles from its own stockpiles. Instead, it will fund the manufacture of 700 Ruter missiles. It seems likely that these missiles will actually be built in the Destinus manufacturing facility that is on Dutch turf, which means Ukraine doesn't have to worry about Russia finding and destroying its manufacturing facilities. Instead, the Netherlands is going to spend the money needed to build 700 Ruter missiles, and then it's going to send the lot to Ukraine. Which of the Ruter missiles Ukraine will receive hasn't been confirmed. There are 3 blocks of these missiles, with the Router Block 1 serving as the basis for the other two. That particular version can travel about 300 kilometers, carrying a 150-kilogram payload, which is perfect for the mid-strike campaign that Ukraine has been using to utterly wreck Russian logistics since around May. The Center for European Policy Analysis adds that the Router Block 2 ups the range to 800 kilometers and the payload up to 250 kilograms. As for Block 3, it can travel 2,000 kilometers to also deliver a 250-kilogram payload. That's far enough to hit Moscow and beyond, and the missile hits hard enough to do plenty of damage to the kind of oil and military facilities that keep the wheels of the Russian war machine turning. The Router is Europe's answer to a cruise missile production problem that has existed for years. The fact that the Netherlands is committing 700 of these cruise missiles to Ukraine means that it's taking Fedorov's comments about a window of opportunity very seriously. Ukraine is already causing major damage in the Russian rear using the drones and its own drone missile hybrids. Add hundreds of powerful mid- and long-range cruise missiles into that equation, and you get a whole lot more pain being delivered directly to Russia's doorstep, right at a time when Ukraine's other partners are boosting Ukraine's defenses against the same kinds of weapons. 4 of Ukraine's allies used the mid-June Ramstein meeting to deliver a message. We're giving Ukraine what it wants and needs. Now, Ukraine's job is to make Russia pay for what it's done over the last 4+ years. Fedorov himself pointed that out, noting that the aid flowing into Ukraine from these 4 countries goes a long way to helping Ukraine with its current 3 key priorities. These are our anti-ballistic program and air defense program. The second priority is long-range artillery. The third is our drones. Ukrainian-made drones that are helping us to stop the enemy today, conduct middle strike operations, and strike targets on enemy territory, Fedorov declares. Anti-ballistics and air defenses are covered, as are the mid-range strike operations and the ability to strike targets inside Russia, assuming Ukraine will receive Router Block 3 missiles. Ask and ye shall receive, Ukraine. And here's what all of this means for the future of the war. The announcement of this bumper military aid package is well-timed because it serves as the perfect counter to moves that Russia has been making, particularly on the aerial front. Liga points out that Russia has been increasing its drone production and modernizing some of its missiles to make its aerial assaults even more of a threat to Ukraine. Indeed, we've seen the evidence of that in recent months. On June 2nd, the Moscow Times reported that Russian aircraft output more than doubled year-on-year in April, hitting 117% more than what was seen in 2025 and far exceeding the average annual growth rate of 68%. This doesn't mean that Russia is suddenly building hundreds of fighter jets per year, far from it. That surge in production is almost entirely accounted for by the manufacture of strike drones that are used to hit Ukraine. As for missiles, June 13th brought with it a report from Liga, noting that Russia is modernizing its Iskander and Kh-101 missiles, along with its Ka-B bombs, by trying to improve their range, increase their resistance to air defenses, and simply scale up production. The military official who revealed all of this, Colonel Alexander Zaruba, is the Chief Research Fellow at the State Research Institute for Testing and Certification of Weapons and Equipment, Liga reports. So he would know what Russia is trying to do. Ukraine needs to counter this increase in drone production and enhanced missile threat. With the air defenses pledged to Ukraine, combined with Ukraine's own work on interceptor drones, confronting this threat has just become possible. Ukraine will intercept more of what Russia sends, and that can only be a good thing, especially when Russian drones and missiles are causing civilian casualties in the hundreds, if not thousands, every month. Defensively, this military aid is a huge boost to Ukraine. But then there's that window of opportunity Fedorov mentioned. He wasn't the only one to use that term during the most recent Ramstein meeting. Rutte used it as well, noting that the meeting provided Ukraine and its allies the ability to shift into a delivery-focused phase ahead of a key NATO summit in Ankara. Window of opportunity. I think this is the main topic today, Rutte said before adding that the assistance focused on Ukraine's priorities will help increase pressure on Russia and force them to sit down at the negotiating table and eventually join serious discussions to stop this terrible war. Talk of a new phase in delivery and military aid isn't idle chatter. It's a reflection of what Ukraine, Rutte, and so many in Europe are now seeing on the battlefield. Ukraine is in the ascendancy, and Russia is struggling to achieve anything like what it's achieved during the last 4 years, despite being in the middle of a spring and summer offensive that is supposed to end the so-called special military operation. The reality on the ground is that Russia's military is under far more pressure than it has been for a long time. Ukraine has counterattacked strategically and intelligently, liberating over 600 square kilometers of its own territory from Russia since the beginning of 2026. This isn't a case of Ukraine liberating some and Russia snatching much more elsewhere. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, says that both April and May saw Ukraine reclaim more territory than Russia managed to steal. So Ukraine is in the black on the net territory front while Russia is being placed on the back foot. If you want to talk about a window of opportunity, this momentum change is massive. It shows Ukraine's allies that more support will inevitably lead to a greater chance of a Russian capitulation. A big reason for this turnaround is the mid-range strike campaign that the Dutch-made Ruta missiles will help Ukraine to further. In its June 20th assessment of the Ukraine war, the ISW said that Ukraine is showing no signs of slowing down on that front, as it systematically strikes bridges connecting Kherson Oblast to Crimea, thus isolating the peninsula that Putin values by strangling off its logistical support. The Atlantic Council makes the same assessment as it points out that roads in the Russian-occupied portions of southern Ukraine have become no-go zones due to the mid-range strike campaign. That campaign also undermines Russian attempts to launch assaults at the front, which is why we see such little progress from Putin's patsies, combined with Ukraine liberating land. Add strikes against Russian energy infrastructure into the mix, and you get a brilliant Ukrainian strategy that weakens Russia at every turn and has caused the tide to shift in Ukraine's favor, at least during the late spring of 2026. Russia will push harder during the summer. We started to see that toward the end of May, as the new Voice of Ukraine reported that Russia had increased the number of mechanized assaults it was launching across the front. But the pressure Ukraine has already created is paying off, and more support now means that pressure can be maintained while enabling Ukraine to protect itself from Russia's aerial strikes. That's why the June 2026 Ramstein format was so massive for Ukraine. It's not just about the money being donated, it's about what that money represents, a concrete acknowledgement from Ukraine's partners that they see the turnaround happening and that they believe Ukraine can do more. Strong support now, as Russia's combat effectiveness is on the decline and Ukraine's is at a high rarely seen in over 4 years of fighting, is crucial. Ukraine needs to maintain the momentum. And thanks to 4 European nations, it just received what it needs to fuck Russia up. That just so happens to be what Ukraine has been doing for a while now, and what we saw in Moscow on June 18th is the perfect example. Hold on to your caps, because a Moscow oil refinery fuel storage unit couldn't, and watch our video, as we reveal the explosions that rocked Russia's capital and caused raging fires. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to the Military Show so you don't miss what we have coming next, and thank you, as always, for watching.